Hey, how you doing out there? Everybody, figured I'd start with a nice little rock concert. Hey man, welcome back to DPA's Facebook Live event. Sorry I had to put you through that, but that's just the way it is these days. We're all kind of at home going, what can I do next? It's even funny actually getting ready for this because you're putting on underarm deodorant and taking a mint and brushing your teeth, and you're like, I'm not going to meet anybody in person, but it's all good. But anyhow, thanks for joining us again. We're all at home focused this time on our family and neighbors. The touring world is at a standstill. The situation has given us all an opportunity to gather for just more than the brief time we usually have. So somehow, I say it every time we do this, it feels like social media the way it was meant to be. And one of my favorite philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, said, the obstacle is the way. So let's get on with the way and break down the way today's going to go. We're going to do some questions with our guest, and we have a great guest today. We're going to stop a few times during the presentation. We'll do some questions. We'll do some Facebook questions. We'll do another set of questions and some discussion, and then some more Facebook questions. And then, we'll discuss our way out. And probably about an hour and 15 minutes is our target. We have Leonardo, who's going to be doing the Facebook questions. We have Jarrett behind the scenes working. And my name is Gabriel Antonini, and we all work for DPA Microphones. So this is a very genuine, open discussion. We may talk about our mics once in a while, but it's not really about that. It's about talking to the interesting people that we have on. And today, we have a really great guy. And his name is Brad Maddox. And,
hi, everyone.
Hey, well, we're going to get to you in a second, Brad. He's rare to go. Anyhow, Brad grew up playing keyboards, right? Mostly organ and piano, but we won't hold that against him. Got into synths and MIDI programming, and basically gravitated towards audio in high school and college, and started doing PA, fell in love with it. His bio actually reads the most simple and genuine, and he is mixed bands such as Florence and the Machine, Rush, Sarah Borealis, Katy Perry, Jack White, Linkin Park, Psychedelic Furs, personal favorite. So, it's a vital cog to sound person in live sound. So without further ado, I can hear you all clapping now. Let's bring out Brad Maddox.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? How y'all doing in lockdown?
I'm getting a drink of tea. Hold on.
All right.
So great, man. So Brad, we're all at home now. What would you be doing right now if you weren't at home?
Actually, today I would have been at home anyway.
Really? Great.
We are. I am waiting to hopefully, fingers crossed, for Motley Crue to start up, but everybody, nobody knows what's really going to happen. I don't think the last time I checked, it's still planning on happening, but we're taking a wait and see attitude, I think.
Yeah, well, we all hope that we get back to work soon.
Yeah.
A lot of industries being affected, but I got faith. I think we'll be there. I think we'll get there, and I'm hoping for late summer. But definitely in this calendar year would be the best. So I always start out by asking people, how did you know that? I read a little bit of your bio, but what was that moment that you really knew doing sound was something that I call it like the fifth Beatle myself is the term, but when did you know that this is really something for you?
I got into audio from the standpoint of like being a keyboard player and learning how to make synths. This is early 80s, so synthesizers were on everything. So like listening to Cars records and learning how to make my synths program sound like what the Cars were doing at the time, for example. I decided that music production and engineering would be a good major in college. So I went down that road, but always thinking I was going to be a player. And for sort of a weird series of events, I took a job. I sort of had some debts to a sound company because I had borrowed some gear from them that got stolen. And I went and offered my services to work for them, essentially for free to sort of make up for it. And wound up getting put out on a tour while I was in college. And sort of I enjoyed it. I wasn't sure it was what I wanted to do with the rest of my career, but the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it. And it turned out I kind of had a knack for it. But there was a moment when my dad came to a show. And my dad's a chemical engineering professor. And I remember sort of seeing in him that he really enjoyed it also, the show and what was going on behind the scenes. And that kind of made it that made it, for me, sort of solidify it as something that was worthy of doing. You know?
Legitimized you, yeah.
Yeah, right. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful, man. I love that when your dad gets involved and says, "I'm proud of you, son," that's everything.
Yeah, you could see that he was actually impressed by what was going on, like the technical aspects of it. And yeah, I've been doing it ever since. And in fact, I had been offered playing roles again since then. And A, they were actually weirdly less money, and B, they were not as satisfying to me, that I didn't have to dye my hair black or wear funny clothes or whatever. I could be myself out in the audience and doing my thing.
Yeah, you didn't get recognized when you were walking down the street. It was.
I don't. If I do, I'm in trouble. Yeah.
That's great. Do you remember what band you were mixing when your father came to see you?
That was the Psychedelic Furs. Yeah.
Oh my God,
I don't remember the year. It would have been late '80s, kind of.
Had to be "Love My Way," right? That whole record.
It was post that, but yeah, that was one of those songs.
That's great stuff, man. I got an image there. That's great. So I got to ask you another question. So this is the fan in me right now. When I saw that you mixed Rush for 16 years, you can see the drums behind me. I still can't play Limelight, but I've been a huge fan of Rush for a long time. I think they're fantastic. I think they're unique, and you got to hang with them for 16 years. So we're going to slowly get into some technical stuff, but I got to ask you a couple questions about them live. I've seen some of the movies. They seem so cool, but did you have to do anything special for timing, or was Neil Peart that good?
Well, he is that good, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
I think a lot of what happened on that tour was sort of just really, it was about presentation. Here's presenting the band. It's one of those bands that was around for so long that they have eras, you know, like you talk about eras in music. There's not a lot of bands that have eras in their career. So it was always challenging to present them. And here we're playing a song from 1974, and now we're playing a song from 2004. And to be true to the original presentation of those on the records, but also put them out in front of the audience in a modern way, for lack of a better word. You know?
Yeah. And so did you ever have to do anything with that band? Like, do you have any playback files? Were they doing everything as far as producing the sound, or because there's three people and you're hearing like a wall of sound?
Yeah, there was no playback ever.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
They're especially like into the 2010s, and they still never did it. And Neil never played to a click. There was every sound that came out of the PA was made by the band. Some of those sounds were samples, to be honest, but it was triggered by, Geddy or Al or Neil stepping on a pedal or hitting a pad. So it was all in time. It came from their playing. So yeah, I mean, there was no crutches, and they almost always pulled it off. The flip side of that was if it went poorly, it was a little rough.
Got any train wreck stories?
There was one that sort of stands out in my mind, and it was the very beginning of a show. As you can imagine, there was a lot of MIDI going on, from pedals on stage right, from pedals on keyboards on stage left, and back in the drums. And I can't tell you what went wrong exactly, but something in MIDI world went wrong. A cable didn't work or something. And they started the show with Subdivisions, which is from their keyboard era. and the keyboards kept like coming and going and coming and going, and for I want to say what felt like an eternity, but was probably a handful of songs before they figured out where the malfunction was and got it going. The funny thing, sort of the cherry on the cake of that story was the audience members were all very, very into the band and very focused on the sound and the production in general. And we took a break at the end of the first set, most of which was the keyboards not working. And the audience was never shy about coming up to me and giving me their opinion
That's great.
what I was doing wrong on any given night. But I had a couple guys come up next to the front of house. I always try to engage them. I don't want to be a jerk. It's nice to, get some feedback and talk to them about what was going on. Well, two guys stepped up to the front of house area, and one said, "Hey, I can't hear the bass." And I had just spent 40 minutes with basically no keyboards. And there's only like 3 other things that are happening. Like, I don't know, like how can I not, anyway, it was just, I had no words. I was just went, oh, okay.
It was a laugh or cry moment. Yeah.
I'll see what I can do about that, kind of. And then I said to him, I said, did you notice that like the keyboards weren't working for a lot of that? And he said to me, well, I'm not really a keyboard guy, he said.
He sounds like Alex Lifeson, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so thankfully, that was one of, over 16 years, one of, I could probably count on one hand times that we had any real technical difficulties. So
that's a blessing, man. Last rush question. How many channels did Neil's kit take up?
Depended on the tour, but I'm going to go ahead and say, because part of his kit was electronic also. So
yeah.
He had an electronic kit behind him. It was sort of around 32-ish.
Holy shit. That's
depending on what we were doing electronically, it would expand and contract a little.
Yeah.
On the last tour, they did a whole other kit. So there was 2 different drum kits. There was one on the, so this is not really fair, but there was one at the first half of the show, and then they sort of went back in time. They switched to a second kit. It was more like what he played back in the early days. And in that case, I'm going to go with, it was more like 48 or more even, I can't remember, but that's kind of cheating because it was really two different kits.
One thing that I tried to work on, unfortunately, we lost Neil Peart, which is it's a great sad thing, but back a few years, we have a Canadian distributor that had a contact that knew Neil Peart, and all I wanted to do was get 4099s on his drum kit. That's all I wanted to do, is put them on every tom-tom. Never got to do that, but I think it would have sounded incredible. So sure. You're at home, you get a call tomorrow, everything's cool, from a tour manager. What are the next steps for you? As Diablo Digital, I know you have a partner too, Greg Price, and what do you guys do? Like, there's so much to manage. There are so many components. There's the live aspect, the monitoring, the video aspect. What's the first thing you do when you get that call?
Well, ideally, I would get some files recorded from the previous show, and use those as a basis for setting up the next show. So I mean, it's kind of like the audio equivalent of getting the input list from the previous tour, but actually having some files to play back and listen to. I can get you so far, I guess. It's not the same as mixing the actual band, but there's depending. I mean, it might be a few days or a couple weeks of getting that laid into a desk and trying out different pieces of gear or plugins on things to get it to go. Make it sound the way you want it to sound, or the way you think it should be represented in a live aspect. And also, send me the new record is often a request. So you're molding what you're doing, prepping for the tour to represent the new record as best possible.
Yeah, it sounds like you're listening to what was done right, and then you're already thinking about what you're going to do to modify for your taste.
Sure, and even if nothing was done wrong, you're still gonna take it in and put your workflow on it and you know, make it work for you.
How many guys on your crew typically? Do you just show up, or then you get A2s provided and monitor guys? You guys provide the whole deal?
I've been lucky to travel with a couple of really, really top-notch system engineers over the last couple of years, and that for years and years I was kind of my own system tech, which is, you know, I would do again, but I kind of learned that these guys, to let them do their job and let them get everything set in a way that is presented to me. I really like it to be like, try to make this sound like a big ass pair of reference monitors.
Yeah.
And then lay the mix in on that. And that's a real blessing to have a person like that to get it all set up that way. And especially when you're bouncing from festivals, which is very common in the summer. Well, not this summer, but generally speaking, very common in the summer to go, and you're on a D&B PA one day, and you're on a L Acoustics PA the next day, and you're on a Claire Code 12 the next day, and so trying to make your mix sound like your mix on those different systems. Honestly, I'm not sure I have the bandwidth to do that at this point in my career. Like, there's so much going on out there.
Yeah, no, that's great though. If you can count on the guys, you can give them a shout out if you want to. It's so important, because when they get from 0 to 9 for you, you could listen to the system and go, you know what, the bass isn't responding the way I want to, or make subtle tweaks. What I used to do too, I was a studio guy for a long time. When I got a live gig, I thought it was going to be easy. Boy, was I wrong.
It's different.
And I had to sort of like listen to the smart systems and look at them. But then I started relying on my own voice, because I didn't have much time to get the system up. So I said, I know what I sound like. Let me hear it. And then let me sort of get somewhere quicker. But it's such an art. I have so much more respect for the live engineers after doing that tour in Europe. Talking about the microphones and the modeling, you said something about you get a different PA every day, you get your system tuned. And most of your artists, or some of your artists, I imagine you'd have to go through different stages of their career, 70s sound, maybe an 80s sound for Rush. You know, how important is the mic in that chain, and for the different PAs, and you know, you're at the source. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, the mic is where it turns from air to electricity. So it's critical.
Yeah.
It may be more critical than any other single component piece of gear. So there's kind of two approaches, I guess. One is, well, am I trying to make this a really, really accurate representation of an instrument, or am I trying to throw something on to actually give it a certain color? Both of which are totally valid. I don't know that there's anything that comes afterwards in the chain. Like, you can't fix a bad mic, or let me say, I won't say bad. You can't fix the wrong mic or the wrong mic placement.
Or maybe the off axis of the microphone is real important. I've known that, you know, if a singer's singing and the cymbal gets whacked near the singer, does that cymbal still sound like a cymbal coming into the side of the mic, or does it sound like something that we don't see?
Yeah, and there's next to nothing you can do to fix that, you know.
Yeah,
You know,
having accuracy, I think, is a good place to start, right?
Yeah. So sure, and like I said, sometimes you're going for accuracy, sometimes you're going for color, sometimes you are going for those things. With the polar pattern is the right polar pattern for a person.
Yeah, exactly.
You might give a little back on accuracy to gain that, but you know, that's one difference between studio and live for sure.
Yeah.
You have to have an element of control that you don't necessarily have to have in a studio, where you can really say, well, whatever else is going on, that's the mic that works on that vocal. Great, but in a room with God knows how many watts of gain, and a yelling crowd and a drum set that's not isolated, polar pattern becomes a consideration. Absolutely.
Yeah. I always like to say, you know, I like to design by rejection first. You know, what does each microphone not want to hear? You know, is a good way. It's the way my mind works for it.
It's definitely something to keep in mind when you're picking out a kit. And I mean, to illustrate how important mic selection is, if we traveled with nothing else, we would take mics.
Right.
If we're bouncing around festivals with not a single other piece of gear, we would take a box of mics.
Yeah.
So it makes a big difference.
Yeah, sure. It gets you a little confidence and a little bit of, okay, we're going to be okay here because we have our what's capturing the sound.
Yeah.
Before I ask the next question, I want to tell everybody out there in Facebook land, please get the questions coming in. There's no silly questions. I know there's lots of you out there, and Brad's given us his time, so have at him. Give him some questions. And Leo, just let me know when you've got a few, and we'll go for it. Something I wanted to ask you too, while we're on the PA system thing. Kind of a twofold question. There's thousands of people sitting in different parts of the arena. Is there any sort of tools you have these days we trust our ears and we trust the microphones, but really we're hearing it. But is what we hear the best for everybody? And how do you go about making sure that mix is sort of similar everywhere?
Yeah, so line array PAs are sort of the PA you see all the time, and they're very, very good for spreading audio around a major portion of the arena. Let's just talk about arenas for the sake of argument. Once you get, depending on the box, once you get about 45, 50 degrees off axis, that starts to drop out. So you have to supplement it for anybody that's sitting off to the side. So the thing you see the most often is a big left and right, and then somewhere off around to the side and behind it, to some degree, you see another sort of smaller version of a PA. And again, critical for the system tech to get that shading correctly, so that if you're kind of in between the two, you're not getting a lot of comb filtering or weird sort of different time arrivals. There's a lot that goes into that. A lot of on the computers nowadays, you can sort of do a lot of that in advance prediction. Yeah. Again, great to have a really good system tech to do that. But I think that stuff's pretty accessible now for any engineer. I would say I don't know if it's a trick exactly, a lot of people do this, but I do reverse image on the side. So if you have the big PA and it's left and it's right, or sorry, your side left and right, your side hangs, I would make them either mono or reverse image left and right, so that if you're sitting off to the side,
right, you're still getting the stereo image.
You're spreading the stereo image off to the people off to the side. So however much stereo you're comfortable doing, which is a whole other argument,
right?
You're kind of spreading that around. Some of the immersive systems that are out there, it's really interesting technology that spreads that image even wider, further around. So that's the steps we can take. We are in some ways at the mercy of other production elements, the video, lighting, how rigging, the building.
Yeah, well, that was my second part of my question, the building. Like, if you're in a space that maybe is, got some reflective surfaces, maybe it's a hockey rink, maybe it's whatever, and dealing with the low frequencies versus, the mid and high frequencies coming out of the system, and you have a long building, I imagine there's some voodoo that has to be done to either back off the volume of one so they reach at the same time, or sort of, compensate somehow, or go omni or go directional with the lows. Yeah. Right.
My first reaction was to think maybe this is a good time to start talking about cocktails.
Yeah.
But look, you go into a building, it generally speaking, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do to fix it. You can manipulate the PA to a degree to cover it better and minimize reflections, which means keeping as much from going as to whatever degree possible, keeping sound from going up into the roof, or off to the sides into, like, a lot of buildings up at high have a wall up there. But the fact is, if you're selling a lot of tickets, you are trying to hit an audience member in section 300 and 400 or whatever it is, and They're 300 feet away. If you have the luxury of hanging delays, that's great. That's definitely helpful. A lot of tours don't carry that. It's adds significantly to the production, but if you can do that, that's great. But the fact is, the room is the room, and as much as you can do you do everything you can to keep the sound focused on the actual people in the actual seats. But shooting sound 300, 400 feet into a hockey rink, it's never not going to sound like you're in a hockey rink.
Yeah, yeah.
I kind of feel like you do the best you can with it and get the band up there, get it rocking, and system tech can walk up there and they make a little adjustment. Maybe you turn the top 2 cabinets up a little bit for those people. I've done shows where we muted high-end drivers in the top because they were just hitting something. But yeah, I don't know. It's acoustics. You can't
and you hit it on the head too. It sure makes it a lot better when the performer's feeling it because they're playing better. And when they're playing better, you've got better level, you've got better source. So it's all like this beautiful, invisible, magical kingdom that happens.
Yeah, sure. You know? I'd say, and if we want to go a little further past the mic, before the mic is the people playing.
Exactly right.
That's probably the most important thing.
Go back to the monitors, and then we're really going to get into something. But before we go any forward, I'm sure we got 1 or 2 questions from Facebook. Leo?
Yes, we definitely do.
Let's bring beautiful Leo on.
Yeah, we definitely have quite a bit of questions here. So the first one, Brad, is what was your biggest challenge when you first went out on tour as a front of house engineer?
Biggest challenge? Well, there's a lot of challenges. I think I mixed in theaters for a bit, kind of that level of audience. So we're talking about 2,500 to 3,000 seat places. They're one thing, and they have their own challenges. I would say stepping into arenas probably were the biggest jump, and it all has to do with acoustics. So the challenges there are, getting from my point of view, get the vocal out in front of the mess, because it's the thing people, in almost every case, the thing people really want to hear. And then giving it real punch without without it just sort of going out there and reverberating forever. So I would say to do that, I mean, I've mixed quite a few rock bands, some of them on the heavy side, and I all want to hear that kick drum and feel it, but you got to be a little bit careful because there's a fine line between feeling the kick drum and swimming in it, So just it's having the reins, keeping the reins on what is nowadays quite a bit of power, and getting the things that need to be out front to get out front and stay out front. Yeah.
But that's a good question. What was that guy's name?
That was, let's see.
It's okay. It's funny because my next question I was going to ask Brad is, what is your hardest live challenge? So that was a good question, buddy.
I think that remains the biggest challenge, honestly.
And you're dealing with drums and you're dealing with guitars. I always thought too, like a quick comment on this is that when you're dealing with EQ or deductive EQ, there must be certain things that you have to compromise with in order to make the main thing pop out like the vocal and not raise everything, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, I would say primarily mixing in any setting is about balance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's probably nothing more important than where you set the faders in relation to each other. Having said that, the next step is finding those. There's sort of probably more than there should be in EQ. Live is problem solving and like, so we talked about being in a really acoustically live environment. Well, yes, you are probably going to just sort of weirdly hack out 100 and, I don't know, pick a number, cycles. You would never do that because it's not really necessarily inherently a problem musically, but it is a problem acoustically. And boy, I've had those times where you just like, I hate to do this, but shoot, away it goes.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of clearing it up
Yeah.
So you've got EQ that's tone shaping and getting the vocal to fit into place with the guitar, and the bass and the kick drum to play nice together. But then there's, on the other hand, there's sort of like a more surgical version of EQ that is like, I just got to get rid of this thing that's building up around 400 and it's got to go, right?
Right. That's awesome. Let's go to another question, Leah. That was great.
So another question from Sean. When you are recording, are you using much more than a line out and room mics, or recording each track and remixing later?
So thanks, Sean. 99% is recording all the tracks and coming back to it later. I do record stems as well. So I have a stereo drums, bass on its own. Depending on the guitar setup, I might have a stereo guitar stem, etc. And one of those is a stem of audience mics. So occasionally we are asked to remix something. Depending on the turnaround, it's either I'm taking all the tracks and remixing it, or here's the stems that, in theory, you put at 0 and spit that out, but you have there an opportunity to kind of go back and tweak a bit, ride the vocal, ride audience mics up and down. So I think I do both things. It's pretty easy to get 128 tracks onto a hard drive these days, so there's no reason not to. So that's, again, most of the time actually it's virtual sound check. So it's playing the tracks back and listening in the room before the band shows up. And then if there's going to be post-production, it's usually all the tracks. Then the next level would be, I need this tomorrow, so it's going to be stems, because that's the quickest thing I can do. And then there's also the two mix, which I send audience mics to. We can talk about how those get delayed to go to the 2 mix and line up, and or other way around, actually, delay the 2 mix to line up with the audience mics. And in a pinch, it's like, hey, can we have the 2 mix to put on a video to go? We want to put a couple minutes of a part of a song up on the website. So we've done that as well.
That's
and
awesome.
then there's live. Here's just the left and the right go, which we've also done.
Yeah, we'll get into some of the video talk later. I've got a couple questions, but Leah, why don't we do 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll go into the real important segment.
Okay, Hannah, she asks, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received? It can be about sound or just about life in general. And what advice do you have for people who are interested in getting into touring when this crisis is over?
Hannah, thanks, Hannah. I think that the single best piece of advice I got, it wasn't really advice, I want to say it was something I heard on the internet or read in a magazine or something, and it was basically that you do, and I've been speaking about this lately, but you do all your important decisions, really important mix, in about the first hour you toy around with it. And that it's important to step away, like step back and watch the show, or at some point during the show, like maybe an hour, maybe sooner, get away from the desk, a few feet away, just get your hands off it, and watch for 30 seconds. And I've found, my experience is that it's really a different mindset when you're running a fader or turning a knob or soloing an instrument. When you step away and look at it from the audience point of view, it's almost like you're using a different part of your brain, and it does sound different somehow. I would say almost always better, because you're not like, when you're on the desk, you're like, that snare drum is driving me crazy. But the fact is, if you step away and listen, can you hear the vocal? It's like the big things start to, it's a different perspective, and the big things sort of come back up to the front of your mind.
Your checklist gets a little shorter, huh?
Yeah, so that's an audio piece of advice. Touring generally is really, you're in close quarters with a lot of people. Depending on, even a smaller tour, you might be in a bus with 10 or 11 other people. And I would say the best advice I ever got was to sort of relax about other people's little, everybody has the things that they need, and you should just let them have those things, you know, and not be judgmental about it or in any way hold it against them. I mean, we all get on the bus, and we all came from 10 or 11 different places in the world and in life, and you're going to hear a lot of sort of interesting perspectives, and you know, they're all valid. Everybody comes at life from their own place, you know.
That's awesome. Good answer. Leo, you got one more we can do, and then we'll go into a little break here.
Yeah, we got one from Kevin. Do you have any creative panning with the PA stacks when mixing a Leslie or anything with vibrato?
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting, and that kind of was Kevin, right?
Yes, Kevin.
Yeah. So that gets us into the stereo mono discussion, which I won't belabor. I'm in the stereo camp. So, but I mean, there's sort of valid points of maybe it's just smart to mix everything in mono. Where I don't like that is in a thing like I'm getting a left and right keyboard patch from somebody, and there is interesting things going on there, and I like to keep it wide. So Leslie's an interesting discussion. I might not go hard left and right, like I would definitely mic it in stereo, but I might not take it all the way hard left and right, because, you know, if you are sitting sort of off in front of one stack, you'll just sort of hear it coming and going as opposed to the actual swirly effect. You know, rational minds may differ on this subject, but that's, to me, the real sound of a Leslie that I grew up with is the first Boston record and the old Santana records.
Right.
And I would even go a step further and say Deep Purple, which is a whole other thing. And that's kind of where that's how I'm informed when it comes to Leslie specifically. And the Boston records, I remember being pretty wide as far as the panning went. I think that you, as in many things live, you may want to compromise a bit to give the totality of the audience, or a larger section of the audience, a better experience.
Yeah.
Does that even begin to answer the question?
I think it was a great answer. Yeah. Stereos is sort of something that everybody goes back and forth with. Some instruments I love hard panned. Other instruments I like mono. And like I think that like really hard stereo panning on a lot of instruments feels unnatural to me when I listen to it with my ears, because our ears are hearing in sort of an omni three-dimensional way. But other things like synth patches, stereo every time.
Yeah, I think that the main consideration is, if I pan this all the way off to one side, are the people on the other side going to lose something?
Exactly.
So
yeah.
I would never take a guitar and pan it all the way to one side of the PA. But I could see a world where I have multiple mics on a guitar and spreading them, giving that an image, would be a really, really great experience for the people who are within that image, and wouldn't take away anything from somebody that's sort of not quite all the way in the stereo image. They'll still hear the guitar. It's arguable. And
would you typically, like if you had two guitar players flanking a lead vocalist, would you favor some panning for this guy to this side and this guy to this guy, just a little bit?
That's where you get into.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where you get into trouble. You might want to take them out of the center so that the vocalist can have the center.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah.
But I wouldn't go far, because if you just took them hard left and right, and there's plenty of records that are made that way, then that person that's out of the stereo image in front of the house right PA, say, is only going to hear, or mostly hear, the one guitar player. I will say that modern PAs, the imagery is way better than it used to be.
Yeah.
I mean, when I came up mixing on horn-loaded PAs, I mean, the image was, if you could hear it at all,
smeared.
you could hear it all. It was not great, and you probably would have been better served to mix mono. But I mean, don't you think when you hear the big tom roll, don't you want it to move a little?
Yes.
That's
yes.
I mean,
yes.
I get how you don't want to take tom one away from the people on the house left side entirely.
Yeah, but we're hearing binaurally. I'm totally with you in that camp, because if you just get hit straight on the center with every tom roll, your brain is seeing the person move. You should be hearing the person move.
Yeah, I think you just need to use your judgment. And like I said, if you're taking a whole instrument away from half the crowd, well, whatever, a third of the crowd, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. But I think if you are sort of placing things in a way that you give a little space for the lead vocal, or the bass, I mean, the things that are sort of clearly going to be mono, like the bass, especially if you're doing like mastering compression, as I'm going to refer to it, because you are kind of doing compression on the output to glue the mix together, as they say. I think sort of clearing some things out of the middle can be helpful if you have that going on also.
Sorry, taking care of things. Like when I used to mix a lot, I remember like putting the high pass on everything except the kick and the bass guitar, and starting there, and then maybe putting some parallels, some sort of compression that if I need to get above something, it's there. Like very minimal things. Do you do anything processing wise to sort of have, like, I guess, a pure signal and also have another thing going that you could beef up?
Well, we're talking about parallel compression.
No.
So I love parallel compression. I use it on a lot of things. But then we get into a discussion about dynamics and live. You don't want to. What I like about parallel compression is you don't lose the high transients. Like, you're not stepping on.
You're bringing up the low stuff.
You're bringing up the stuff that would otherwise be quiet. And I think there's a floor, and it's kind of interesting. It depends on the band. It might depend on the venue that you're trying to get. The little crash cymbal hits. I mean, I use it a lot on drums. We're trying to get those little detail things to kind of come up from the bottom, as opposed to smashing down on the top. But I think parallel compression can be used in a lot of places. It works great on bass also.
Like on drums, would you use it on just a few choice microphones, or the whole set as a stereo?
I'm old school. It's on the whole damn kit.
Nice.
My frame of mind is that the drums are an instrument. I mean, we know technically there are lots of things blended together, but when you're putting together a mix, when I'm putting together a mix of the whole thing, however it gets there, it's going to get to a subgroup, and that subgroup is drums, and they are an instrument, just like a guitar is an instrument.
Exactly. No, I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. And you know what? If you have these little parallel tools, you can use them very much like makeup. Just a little bit sometimes is all you need to really get a studio feel going.
It's one of those tricks where a little goes a long way.
I agree.
I mean, it can be tucked 10, 15 dB down under the vanilla bus, the untreated bus, whatever, and really have a profound impact on the result.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to get back to more questions. That was a great answer for I forget, was that Charlie or somebody who asked that question? But great answer. I made a mistake the first time we did this event, and I started printing envelopes with people's names on them. So I got Brad's here.
You're just the envelope guy now.
It's the envelope guy now. Everybody gets one. But this will lead us into the next segment, is something about Argentina and cocktails. So you got to tell us about this.
So I have this thing. I love to go to really what I like to find really, really high quality, but kind of under the radar or hidden even bars, with really great bartending. And there's a place in Buenos Aires. God, I hope it's still there. I haven't been in a while, but called Floreria Atlantico. look it up. I don't remember the address. I mean,
Leo probably knows where it is.
Leo might know where it is. Yes, it is literally a flower/gift shop that mysteriously is open still at midnight. You
Gotta get flowers.
a lot of things in Argentina are, and you walk through a cooler of flowers. If you go into a florist and they keep the flowers in a cooler, it opens up and there's a staircase and you walk down in there and it is fantastic. And they have guest bartenders, like people fly down from New York and of all over the world actually, and really, really, really well put together drinks and food, by the way. They have a really excellent restaurant in there as well. So I highly recommend it.
So what's your favorite cocktail? And then what's your, like, 5 drinks? You told me you have 5 drinks you need to know how to make, which I need to practice. But what's the best? What's the famous one that you liked from the James Bond movie?
So I think there's 6 drinks actually, but we can get into that.
Okay.
The one from the Bond movie is called the Vesper Martini. It's
I love it.
sort of like, it's from Casino Royale, and I can't quote it word for word, but he actually tells the bartender, Bond tells the bartender how to make the martini he likes. It's where the shaken, not stirred thing comes from originally, I think. It's a blend of gin and vodka and vermouth. The dry martini is one of those like 6 classic drinks that if you're gonna bartend, even if you're doing it at home, it's one you definitely need to learn to make. But it's not hard. And he does the whole rundown. He gives the bartender exactly the instructions of how to mix this drink, and doesn't call it anything. But he basically immediately thereafter that scene, he meets the spy, and I won't spoil the ending of the movie. Her name is Vesper, so it's become known as the Vesper Martini. But it is Ian Fleming invented that drink. He literally wrote it.
I remember the scene because everybody started ordering it, and the bad guy was like upset. Yeah. And then the last guy said, "I'll take the same thing, hold the fruit." Something like that. Yeah, it was fantastic. So what's the other drinks? Give us the other 3 real quick before we go through your gear list.
Okay, my gear list. Secondary to the alcohol list. Well, like I said, I think there's actually 6. Dry martinis are one you should know. The daiquiri is another sort of classic. Margarita is another classic. Margarita is a whole family of drinks, actually. Comes from a drink called the Daisy, which is basically mean it's liquor and fruit. Old fashioned is another one. Negroni also lends itself to a whole other bunch of drinks. And then my go-to is the Manhattan. Bourbon and sweet vermouth and bitters. Very, very simple, classic, great balance of spirit and sweetness and a little bit bitter. And there's my classic.
So you all thought you were just going to get sound information here, but you all learned how to make a great cocktail.
This is what we do with our downtime.
Exactly. I wanted to mention something quickly that we're all using, and that's kind of a plug, but what the hell. This little thing is called an MMA, and I'm using it with my little DPA mic, 4098. I think Brad's using one with his 6000 around his neck there. I just wanted to let you all know these days how we're getting better audio through the internet for church services, for this kind of thing. Just because it's something, to be brutally honest, is a fantastic quality product that we never really sell a lot of, to be honest. And now everybody wants one, but because of what's going on. But it's a great 2-channel A to D and 114 decibels of dynamic range. It's fantastic. But that's how we're doing this. So you have a funny story or a good story about a product, but I wanted you to see if maybe our audience would be interested in having you sort of like quickly run through your setup at your front of house and what's your go-to stuff, what you're using there. Like, you can name names and name brands. That's all good.
Okay. So my workflow, I'm using an S6L, the Avid S6L. Over the past few years, I've been touring with bands that sort of hopped around from continent to continent. So I've really gravitated towards mixing in the box, so to speak. Everything I don't have an outboard package. That's where I'm at now. It may all change, but I do it on the desk, everything on the desk, and I'm So I'm not, I like that I can focus my attention on the show, and if I need to get something in front of me, I need to EQ a hi-hat or something that's buried for some reason, I can bring that right up in front of me and work on it without having to step off to the side and take my head out of that mixing space. So I don't really have, at the moment, like a piece of gear other than the stuff that comes stock on the Avid, and I've been using McDSP plugins quite a bit lately. I really like them. Obviously, there's Waves plugins. They're quite popular and excellent. And Crane Song Phoenix is another one that I'm a big fan of.
It's a good one, yeah.
Gives it that kind of tapey vibe to it, an instrument. So I don't know if it's kind of not much of a list. I know people have giant racks.
Incredible. You're probably building these files before you go, as show files too, as well. To me, I'm real sensitive to latency, so I'd imagine, you're going with those plugins that are really giving you, like, they're working there, but they don't show themselves in that.
Yeah, and latency can be a problem for sure. I think that like a lot of the Wave stuff, not all of it. I mean, there's some sort of packaged plugins that can be quite latent, but a lot of it's pretty fast. The stuff that's on board on the desk is pretty fast. The McDSP stuff is, to the best of my knowledge, I am not sure I actually have checked all of it, but it tends to be pretty fast. I think you're trying to keep latency as low as reasonably possible, obviously, but you are mixing from 150 feet away.
Yeah.
It's definitely not the concern you would have if you were mixing in-ears, where you really want to keep it down. So I think I can get away with a little bit more than a monitor engineer might be able to get away with. Or I don't know, some other circumstances, maybe streaming might be another place where it can be problematic. But so I mean, if you're trying to marry audio with video and get it out the door live, another place where you probably need to be, consideration for that.
It's an interesting lead into a quick question. We'll do like one or two quick ones for me, and then let's go back to Facebook for like 4 or 5. I'm sure we have a few, right? And then we'll kick back to another mic. But when you're dealing, you say you do a lot of video production or support for video production. So your product is going to become part of a video product. Yeah. There's got to be a little bit of, a few things that you think of that typically you're not. One of my curiosities is the timecode and the syncing of the cameras. And, we know that in film, audio sort of is the master of the timecode, but how are you dealing with timecode, and what happens after the concert when you're working on one of these videos?
Well, so there's two sort of different applications of timecode live. If you're working with a band that has track, and many do these days, or even just playing to click, if you can get timecode from the source, you can use that timecode to fire snapshots and sort of control the mix as it gives you a little more ability to sort of tweak a little bumps up here and there that you might not necessarily want to take your hands off the lead vocal to do, but they're helpful. Then there's timecode when it relates to video. We generally, I might take timecode and stripe it, but we don't typically chase video timecode or sync to video timecode, because our clock it's critical our clock is maintained, and to sync to timecode, we would have to take clock from them to truly sync to timecode. We would have to take clock and a video reference. So we might record those things. So if we take audio, say they cut a video of a show from capture from several different cameras, we would have to remix to that, whether we're doing it stems or even just editing files, or we're doing a full remix. We would have to find, if they've cut any time out, we have to cut that out of the audio as well. So what I like them to do is burn the time code they had into the video, and then I have the time code they sent me, which I recorded, and I can sort of shuttle around in there and see, well, what is that? Actually line up the numbers.
Yeah, like you have a visual reference as well as a time code.
Yeah, yeah. And oddly, that's always not exactly right. You still might nudge it around a little bit to make it. I mean, I would say find a real clear snare hit, and scrub it until you get that snare hit. Nudge it back and forth until you get that snare hit lined up.
And they're giving you shotgun audio off the cameras, right? Or
no,
some...
it's typically if we're getting an audio fullback, it's something I've already sent them. Gotcha. Another great way to line stuff up, because they'll cut to that, and that will get cut also. And I'll take the original left and right, just raw recording, and one thing that's interesting to do, it works to a degree, is to flip that in phase, and then sort of line up, nudge it with the track they've sent you until it sounds as out of phase as possible.
Yeah.
and then you've got it lined up, and that gets you, damn close, honestly.
Yeah. I used to put one left and right and have the original and this one, and then line them up to where they both sounded like. Sure,
which also could work. And the out of phase thing, it's never exactly right. Yeah. Especially since I'm sending him stuff with audience mics in it too, in case he needs to ship it to some other broadcast. Like when people show up from the news channel to show so-and-so band is in town tonight, we like to have them take that feed from video if we can. And then, if it's for whatever logistical reason we're taking it from front of house, then I'm sending them a matrix that's got the audience mics blended into it. The trick there is that when you're recording off of that matrix, you're delaying the direct mix to line up, in order to line up all the audience mics you've got spread out, or several of which may be at front of house. You're setting that back. So you might have to bypass that just for the sake of giving it to the media, or even set up a different matrix feed that doesn't have that on it.
And you've got a little trick as far as doing a very coincident little microphone that you use sometimes for the crowd, right?
Oh, you're talking about the 5100?
Leeway, yes, totally, I am. Before we get to that, I wanted to ask, for audio engineers that are coming up, the video is providing more work for you guys, isn't it? Because more and more shows are going to second lives. They're just not the live show, but I would imagine lighting techs and audio techs are getting more work.
Well, we just recently remastered something for a video that Florence the Machine's camp wants to put up online. I'm not sure where, but I know that that's sort of in process. And that was, we actually pulled from the vault the original multi-track from that show, and that was a sort of a stem fix where we took the left and right and some stem balances, and since it's all lined up in Pro Tools, so you can just kind of take them back into the desk, and mostly it amounted to kind of like, well, we can have the vocal a little more out front for this setting, and small rebalances, and then crowd between songs, more crowd between songs, and then a little tasty sort of mastering thing on top of that, and shipped it back. I was given the actual line cut from the show, unedited, so there was no real. Once you lined it up at the beginning,
you're good.
You were good. So it didn't take much more work than kind of a day of sitting at the desk and getting it pumped up to the level you wanted, and tweaking a few little things.
Once you lock into that black burst and that transport speed, you're good.
Assuming it was all clocked because it was cut to the original. It was cut to the original audio feed I sent them, which I also tracked to Pro Tools, it was really kind of a matter of making sure the front and the back of that lined up, and it did. And I don't know, he may have to nudge it back and forth a little bit when he lays it back in, but it was pretty straightforward from my perspective.
Well, that's killer. That's killer. So I think what we're going to do next is we're going to take about 4 or 5 questions, and then we're going to go back to the 5100 story and maybe play a file back that you could describe. But Leonardo, please take it over. Let's hear a few questions.
So the interesting question that we have is, what's the session on the console behind you?
Well, maybe.
Oh, what's sitting here right now?
Yeah.
This is Sarah Bareilles' show.
Nice.
We were going to talk. I have it up because we used a DPA 5100 to record our audience on that tour, and I thought we'd maybe throw it on, and well, I don't know what it's going to house.
Maybe it's a natural leeway. If we can hold off on the other questions, we'll take a minute and do it now.
Right.
But the 5100 is one of my favorite mics, man, in the world. It's super light. And it's a 5.1 microphone. And a real quick story, because I know he's going to play back some stuff, is that it's made of Omni microphones because of the lack of proximity and because it's less prone to wind noise and popping. And then they physically chamber it for a 5.1, and then they put interference tubes on the front 3 microphones to cause directionality. And so you're getting a really, really, very, very small distances between the 3 front microphones and the rears, so timing issues are not a problem. But Brad, describe the way you use it, and which a lot of engineers are catching on because of what you did. Please take it away.
Yeah, I'm not sure I originated this, but we were looking for a real straight ahead surround sound, so and reasonably priced to capture a show we were recording down in LA in Dodger Stadium, and we put it up. We got the mic on site. We put it up and raised it up on a pole, 18 feet off the ground or so, right at front of house position. And because in that we weren't mixing in that scenario, we were simply tracking. We had an opportunity to kind of just sit back and listen to that mic on its own, and it was really, really amazingly good. Very coherent, a really nice representation of the band coming through the PA, and the crowd. I would say more like ambience, but like a very ambient recording of the audience as well. I mean, it was a stadium, so it's not indoors exactly, but you've been to a ball game, there's things bouncing around all over the place, and it's in its own interesting acoustic space. It captured it great. I mean, I think we spent 20 minutes just listening to that mic and thinking how good it sounded. So, and I think part of that is just like you said. I mean, it's got directionality, but it's also very, very compact. And
it's like 12 ounces or something. And the cool thing to me is like when you crossfade from the end of a song to the audience applause, there's always that sort of drop off if the microphone's not off axis, extremely linear and picking up everything the same all the way around the mic. We've all heard, there's no better transient test as well as 20,000 people clapping at different time intervals. So there's a lot going on. The microphone's got to move super quick in order to capture it. And that's sort of what it brings it home, and it's used for sports as well. The file you're going to play, though, we should say that you're coming through your stereo speakers there,
right, into
your 6,000 microphone on your chest.
Yeah, my little mic on my chest.
So we're monoing the signal, and then we're just going to go for it and tell us what we're going to hear.
There might be the worst case scenario.
Well, let's go.
I think with that in mind, it's just a representation of how well the mic folds down into mono, but also you just get kind of a taste of the balance of this is recorded at Madison Square Garden. It's going to play the very tail of the show where the band sort of comes to an end and you hear the audience come in, and this is just the mic. So there's no it's not the mix. It's not all the multi-tracks or.
So you're just hearing the PA system.
We're literally hearing just what's in the room.
Yeah.
So with all that being said, this is the end of a song called Saint Honesty, and the band will fade out and the crowd will come in, and then you'll hear Sarah say thank you, good night, and we'll see how it goes. So there you have it.
And that's what, 5 channels dropped down to 2? Or,
and then 1.
and then 1. That's pretty remarkable that the intelligibility still came through and all that going down. That's cool, man. That's really cool.
So I just thought it's a very, I mean, I know we're sort of working within this limited stream here, but I think it demonstrates how that one mic also captures the music, albeit in an ambient space, but also captures the crowd at the end. It's a funny thing we try to do when we track this stuff and remix it and send it back out, is that balance between audience and ambience.
Yeah.
You want to get both, and they do 2 different things. And this mic does a pretty good job of doing both things. I can see using multiple 5100s in different.
Get some height and get some medium.
Different places, or even something closer to the stage, like really kind of an audience from the stage perspective kind of thing.
Or maybe
having said that, the imagery of the mic, it's really good. I know it's impossible to tell, but it's really nice and coherent from left to right and to rears if you're mixing in 5.1. I mean it's just this, it's just this one thing that goes up on a pole, and there's a cable that comes out of here, and
a little limo. It's crazy, and I think you were nice enough to offer like a piece of that audience file if anyone wants it. And on top of that, I had a buddy go to Ecuador and record hummingbirds in 5.1 with that microphone. He put the feeder on top of the microphone.
Nice.
I can offer them as well, so maybe we'll get the hummingbird files and Brad's audience if you want to hear the mic. It's pretty cool. You're using a few other things of ours, which will get you later, but let's go to more questions.
Well, actually, that's one question is what type of mics do you use on your drum kit?
So the mics I was introduced to when I first started using them on drums, I think we sort of chatted about before the podcast about the 4099 I had always had in my mind was a really, really great mic to put on a violin or a cello. It had not crossed my mind to try it on drums. At some point, Leo suggested I give it a go, and we put it on drums in Linkin Park rehearsals. And
that's a good test.
I was really, really amazed at how well it handled, a rock drum kit, for lack of a better word. It's got a great transient response. And it took the SPL it never crunched out on anything, no matter how hard we hit the drum. You could hear, the sound to me was like you really got the stick sound, more of the stick sound, more of that kind of transient off the top of the drum. And it sounded natural, also easy to manipulate on the desk, EQ'd really well. So
it's like you almost hear the wind move with this microphone. You hear the stick, you can really feel the sound and the resonance of the instrument.
Yeah, it was eye-opening to me that I never considered it in that world. I can't see. I've used them since on congas and all sorts of other places, and it worked out equally well there. So yeah.
And before you move to the next one, this is what this looks like, guys. you know, and it's on a little gooseneck, comes with clips for all instruments, but, you know, it is basically a miniature shotgun microphone. And
I'll throw in there that also I've had varying experience with clip-on mics and the gooseneck problems, I would say, and it stays in place.
And the durability, I mean, it's going to get hit once in a while. And this guy here takes 152 decibels. And the other version, it takes like a 144, so it's extreme SPL and loud. But it's right. I mean, can you speak to the cabling and the durability of this mic too? It looks kind of very delicate and elegant, which it is, but it's quite durable when it comes to the rock set, I think.
I'm gonna say, knock on wood, I don't recall ever having one go down.
Well,
it's not gonna fail ever because what's going on is too loud, or even if I'm trying to think if I ever remember an instance of it getting hit.
Yeah. I saw Dennis Chambers hit one right in front of me, and it was pretty cool.
Well, I mean, which is the other thing is it's very small.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can get it, sort of get it where it needs to go without being in the way.
Less mic stands, cleaner, looks better to the directors and all that. What's the other mics that you're using? Anything else?
The other is the 2011C, which I've been putting on. I mean, I've sort of gravitated towards things like hi-hat and overheads and snare bottom. I'm not sure it wouldn't work on a thousand other places. Yeah. I think we had a little sort of cowbell tambourine stand on Florence that we put it on, and again, and I can say that mic did get hit once, and it kept going. So it's also works in that way. I tend to put windscreens on the overhead mics just because we go in and out of outdoor venues, just to keep it the same. So even if we're inside, sure, I'll leave the windscreens on.
It's sort of a blessing, and then sort of what keeps our R&D department up at night. I mean, it's hard to market the fact that a lot of the mics can be used on different instruments, but we're all about capturing that natural sound. Like, we wanted to make it sound like there is no microphone, and there's a lot of passion that goes into that, and that's sort of what comes through on that. The 2011 too that he's talking about looks like this, guys. It's just a modular system with different preamps, and this is a twin capsule cardioid called the 2011. Let's go to the next question.
Yeah, we got a question from Michael. Have you handled two or more guitars that are playing in the same key register, sounding very similar, getting them separated and intelligible from each other? How do you do it?
Yeah, well, if they're playing the same thing, kind of feel like they're kind of meant to be in the mix together, But I think the point being that if they're fighting each other, then that's where it gets problematic, right? Their approaches might be, I tend to compress guitars lightly. So if one reason for it, first of all, I just kind of like that sound on guitar, a little bit of compression. But also it means if a guitar player sort of drops down to play a little lick, that can sort of maintains its place in the mix instead of dropping out, which can be a problem, or alternatively like popping out too much. So there might be a place where I just ever so slightly pan them away from each other. You could also treat them with different EQs, and I find two ways to go about that. Like, find a place on the guitar that sounds really good if it's, sort of a bump at 1K or 1.6 or something that makes it sound sort of AC/DC-ish, or if it's higher up that makes it a little bit sort of brighter. Maybe treat the two guitars slightly differently. I think it's more of a challenge to keep the guitars from fighting the vocals, because they want to play in that same frequency range. Places where I've had that, where you're guitar vocal going back and forth. I kind of like putting the guitars into a group and putting compression on that group and keying that compressor really slowly on and off with the vocal somehow, however you route that, if it's an aux send or whatever, but feeding the key of the compressor on the guitars with the vocal, and that can kind of sit the guitars back when the singer sings. I know that's not directly to the question, But I think you have to make a decision on whether the two guitars are meant to be playing in unison as one guitar, or if they're doing different things, you need to get them apart. Then it's a little treatment of EQ or panning, and then I like that little sort of tickling the compressor on them as well.
I like that.
Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. I love the like, carving something out of the EQ, just to pop something else out. Sort of, I call frequency matching, but that's exactly.
Sometimes taking a lot of something out of one guitar and then taking a lot of something else out of the other guitar can give them two different characteristics. That can work. Well, a lot of this is like it depends, right? I mean, what the two guitar sounds are,
right,
and what the parts are. There's probably not a one size fits all answer to that question, unfortunately.
I think you did a great job answering it. It's a good question. Yep. Give another one, Leo.
Yeah, we got it from Jeffrey. When did you make the transition from analog to digital disc?
Early on. I was the early adopter. And I've gone back and forth a little bit. I mixed the first Rush tour. Going back a little further, I mixed Leopard. I'm going to get the date wrong. I was mixing Leopard. We're starting a tour. I believe it was X. This would have been right around 2000. The Digico had just come out with the D5 Live, and I sort of just decided I was going to hop into that. But something I'd been kind of anticipating for a while. And long story short, since then I've been, sort of a digital, mostly in the box live engineer. So the first Rush tour I did was PM1D, and the second Rush tour I did was also a PM1D. I mixed Shakira on a Profile. I've kind of started using the S6L. I think the first tour I toured with it was Linkin Park. But so I've gone sort of played, touched all the bases on them, and I want to express a very strong preference, other than sort of for my workflow, coming from a person that kind of knows his way around Pro Tools. I gravitate towards the Avid stuff, but all the platforms sound really good right now, so it's whatever fits your style to me.
That's cool.
Another question we got from John. What advice would you suggest future front of house engineers on how to get mentored in our industry? Is there something that Diablo Digital is doing around mentorship? Just speaking for myself, Diablo Digital doesn't really have, we're two guys in a warehouse. Not really in our bandwidth exactly, but I've done some things touring where through various organizations where I had someone come along and shadow. Mentoring, I think, the way I got mentored was working for a sound company and being out on a tour with really good sound crew chief and system techs, and engineers also, who I just really paid attention to what they were doing and stole their tricks from them.
Do you ever do things where you bring like before, like a sound check or something, you bring some kids in from a local school? Or
I have once or twice. I'm always kind of conscious of how the artist is going to feel about that kind of thing, and some are like whatever, some want their sound checks to be closed.
You need to open up your own mixing school now, man. You're going to be home for 2 months.
I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing.
Let's go to another question, Leo.
Kevin, he's asking, can you please comment on mic placement with regards to XY or ORTF?
Nice.
In what?
Overheads, probably, right?
Overheads, okay.
Yeah. But was that right, Leo? Overhead?
Yeah. So XY is probably technically one of the better ways to do it. It's not, but because you're going to be doing that basically right over the drummer's head, it's not, depending on the act, it's not always realistic. Like for example, we tried a single overhead ribbon my hand's not in the picture. We tried a single overhead, like Blumline pair ribbon mic over Alex Van Halen, and it's a really fantastic sounding mic, but Alex is, 6.5 feet tall and likes to stand up and hold a stick over his head between songs. So to get it high enough to the point where, that he could be the performer that he is, it kind of took it out of the range where it was going to be effective. And that most of the time you're going to get a stage right and a stage left overhead. So my trick, again, another thing I stole from another engineer, is to pay attention to how far apart those mics are, or how far away those mics are from the snare drum predominantly. Because that's the thing that gets hit on every 2 and 4 for the whole show. And there's no magic number. I mean, I'd like to get them like each to be about 5 feet from each other and 3 feet each from the snare drum, but that's a lot of times that's too close.
Yeah.
The number I sort of find myself playing around is 40 inches.
Yeah.
So if you can find a geometry that works, and every kit's different, but if you can find a geometry that works that gets you each overhead about 40 inches from the snare drum, the center of the snare drum, and also about 16 inches above the cymbals. And I would also draw a line from the directly over the floor tom, the lowest floor tom, to directly over through the snare drum to directly over the highest tom tom, and try to get them on that axis. Now, every kit's different, like I said, and cymbal placements are different. This is all sort of meant to capture the whole top of the drum kit. If it's realistic to do, I highly suggest you to play around with those not necessarily those exact numbers, but just to find that geometry that works. A lot of times, if the drummer's right-handed, the stage right overhead looks weirdly low compared to the stage left overhead. But usually, or often, those cymbals are also a little lower, especially the ride cymbal. Yeah. And those floor toms are also, it might be 1.5 or 2 feet lower than the highest rack tom. So you're creating a plane. It looks weird from standing in front and looking at it from the stage, but you're making an even plane across, between the 2 overheads that picks up that whole top of the kit more or less, hopefully evenly.
Yeah, you're capturing, what's coming off of the set in a certain direction. I totally agree with that. I did a lot of jazz for a while, and I found that a lot of times guys would put the mics too wide, and if you close your eyes and listen to the set and you open them, you picture a wider set than it actually is, and that's because those mics are spaced too far apart.
Sure.
I personally like, for jazz, 1 microphone overhead and sort of experimenting with the close mics, but that's a great answer.
Sure, and I'd say, like, if I could do anything I wanted, I probably would do some coincident pair directly over the snare drum.
Yeah.
Just that's often not realistic. Depending on the drummer you're working with, and I'd have it so down low they'd probably call me back up to the
or the video guys would scream at you. Another important thing for overhead mics is the off axis of the microphones. If you are doing XY or ORTF, you need to make sure that the off axis of the microphone is extremely linear, the same as the front axis, so that it's extremely important. So all the sounds that come into the side, if you're like this or you're like an ORTF at 110 degrees, the side is the same as the front, just lower in volume. So everything sort of works together. It's important. So check the specs of your mics.
Yeah, I would say like when I am in a controlled environment in the studio recording, I kind of tend to go more like a room mic than really like. I guess I don't approach it from the idea that I'm miking cymbals.
Yeah.
Like to me, I'm trying to get a somewhat more distant sound. Like, I mean, I have mics that are, an inch above a drum, and then I'm trying to just get something that's sort of slightly more ambient, but also just sort of like a distant mic on the same instruments. And it brings a different component from that mic that is,
Sure.
literally just miking the drum head.
And you have a lot of tools at your disposal. You're bringing in the room, the resonance of the instrument, and then you're a little bit of close miking. That's fantastic. I think it's great. Yeah, Leo, another question, and then we'll start wrapping up.
I think we're good, Gabe.
You're good. So, last thing for me is when you are in the studio, because I know you do some studio stuff, do you typically like listen to one instrument at a time, or do you put up the whole rhythm section and get everything playing nice together? Or do you have any certain approach you do?
Yeah, I mean, we're just talking about mixing here.
Yeah.
I tend to be like, I want to put the first thing I want to do is get all the faders up and start working on balance. And I would say even from a live perspective also, to start working on a really, like, before I put a plug-in or a compressor on anything, just getting a balance. Like, can I get the drums to sit together within themselves, and then the bass to sit in the mix with that, and get the guitars in a place, or the keyboards, or whatever we're working with, and then have a spot in the middle for the vocal. I sort of go back to that's like the most important hour of mixing is that,
Yeah.
And then it's gets into, on the one hand, some problem solving, on the other hand, some enhancement. But I'll always come back to, if your gain structure is right, give me a low pass, or give me a high pass filter, maybe a low pass filter, depending, and some faders. And I would prefer just to have a really good input and those elements than any other single, trick. I mean, I think we are technically minded. We really like to dive into the tips and tricks stuff, and all that stuff is cool. But I think it's very easy to overlook the fundamentals.
Yeah, man.
Which is getting that thing to tape or Pro Tools right in the first place, which means getting the mic on the right instrument in the right place, and then the kind of fundamental placement of faders and fundamental placement of pan pots, and then you're probably going to find that is just there's something bugging me in the high end of the guitar. Let me take that out. And
a very organic approach. I love it. I always
but I just it was just to say that don't leap past that stuff.
Yeah.
And I fall into that trap all the time also. Like I'm in a hurry. I'm just gonna make a parallel compression bus for the drums and just throw it up there and go. But I mean, you may find that, well, on this song, it's just not appropriate. But here you are, you're neck deep into it already, and don't get yourself into a place where you're wasting your time undoing stuff you did without really listening to the.
I think that's a great way to end it, because it's so wise. I mean, some of the greatest records, from Elvis to Frank Sinatra to the Beatles stuff, that's the way it was made. Yeah. So don't leapfrog over what really makes our bodies happy, which is just hearing all the intimacy. I once read something where they said that each microphone is like a match, and you find out where it lights up. And you could hear a lot of times. I think my buddy Bo, actually, at DPA, told me a trick once. Put headsets on, grab the mic, have the guy play, walk around until you listen, until you say, hey, I want to put a mic right here because it sounds good right here. That's where that microphone lights up, and sort of build that way. We can't thank you enough for loving our products and just being a great guy, and the work that you do and the people you work with. We thank you from the bottom of our heart.
My pleasure.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And all the people out there who do the same thing, the sound catchers, we appreciate it. We all have that in common, that we want to capture high quality sound, and it really gets us excited. This Thursday coming up, we're going to have Eddie Kaipo on, who mixes Gwen Stefani, and he may have a couple surprises. He always does. I want to make sure everybody, wish everybody to be safe and to be healthy. Take care of your loved ones. Take care of your family and the people that are hurting right now. And again, Brad, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad.
I'm going to end with a little singing bowl performance. There you go. Ready? This is great. Ciao, everybody. See you.